from other countries, and they try to tell me, you know, how dangerous our guns are in America. And I say, well, yeah, to people who want to take away our rights and countries who want to take away our rights, they can be very dangerous.
That's right.
And don't forget it, right? So there was a commander-in-chief for the Japanese Navy, and he once said, and this is World War II, he once said something to the effect that they didn't want to attack America because there would be a gun behind every blade of grass. And we're going to keep it that way. So what I want to talk about today are the people who live among us who want to take away our rights. How do they do it? Well, they do it through a whole bunch of propaganda. They have a media campaign. They have a type of rhetoric and a type of anti-gun fear campaign that they use. So I want to talk about that stuff today. First I'm going to talk about some of the terminology that we all are aware of when it comes to the anti-gun crowd. You know the terms. And I'm going to go through some of those, and then I'm going to get into some of the less noticeable, the more discreet ways that they try to demonize guns and gun owners and change the way we think about guns in America. And so I'll hit on some of these things that I'm sure you're aware of. The first one here is assault weapon. Everybody's heard the term assault weapon, right? Right. You may remember when Dianne Feinstein, they were pushing for the assault weapons ban, when Dianne Feinstein came out and held up that AR-15. And the next thing we knew was that assault weapon, the term was used all over the place. It's continually used now. And it's really just a term used to scare people who don't know any better. Right. And so we're familiar with that, and we see it, but we start to understand the tactic and the strategy and the reason they use it. You may remember this one when it was really popular with Obama and Hillary, weapons of war, right? These are weapons of war that are going to be lurking around the cul-de-sac in your neighborhood, on the streets of, And again, it's to scare people who don't know any better, and to make them think that these crazy weapons of war, which they can't really even define, are in your neighborhood, and you should be very scared, and you should support gun control laws. That's the goal. We always hear this one here, which is very funny to me, the Wild West, right? So this is to make you think that there will be shootouts in the produce section, or road rage incidents where people are shooting each other because they can't control themselves in their anger. So we're going to have the Wild West. We're going to have shootouts at noon, at noon or whatever. Again, it's to get people who fear guns already to support more gun control, more gun restrictions. And the new one here, I'm sure you've heard this one recently. The ghost gun term, right? We've all heard the ghost gun term. Well, ghost gun is really a term for guns that they can't track, guns that the government can't track. So they use the term ghost. What's scarier than ghosts, right? We're all scared of ghosts. That's why we watch horror movies and everything. So ghost gun is a really good term to scare people. But the idea behind ghost guns is to push for gun registries. See, the idea that guns can't be tracked and traced is supposed to be this crazy notion. But I don't remember reading in the Second Amendment where it said the right of the people to keep and bear arms as long as the government knows exactly where your guns are. That was it? It wasn't written in there, was it? I don't think so. At least I missed it.
Nope.
It's none of the government's business.
That's right.
Amen.
But ghost guns is a term to get people to support universal background checks, which is ultimately a gun registry. I'm going to talk in a little while about how gun registries are used in conjunction with red flag laws. It's going to be very interesting. I'm going to get through some of these. Okay, so here's the last one, and I'm sure you've heard this one plenty of times, right? Gun violence. This is the big daddy term. This is what their whole fear campaign is based on. It's based on this idea of gun violence. Well, you know, there's no such thing as gun violence. Gun violence just doesn't exist. What we're talking about is human violence.
That's right.
But why do you think they don't want to talk about human violence? You see, the policies that they support, open borders, sanctuary cities, you know, government dependency, poverty, you know, early release of criminals and prisoners. You know, where I'm from, up in New York, don't hate me for that, by the way, I'm in upstate New York. We have an appointed governor, I guess, a non-elected governor,
Right.
who just released almost 200 criminals from Rikers Island. No. So I'll probably get into a little bit of that, and you know, but the idea here for the left is to, it seems, to create a victim-predator society, releasing prisoners while simultaneously cracking down on gun control laws that prevent us from being able to protect ourselves. There's no such thing as gun violence. Violence is a behavior. A behavior can only be acted out by a person or an animal. No such thing as gun violence. What we're talking about is human violence. So, I want to get into some of the more subtle ways that they use to kind of change our thought process on gun ownership. So, you may have heard no one needs an assault weapon. Well, there's something inherent in this statement. There's an inherent word in here that you might recognize it when you say that no one needs an assault weapon. There's something that they're implying. There's an implication in this statement, and it is the word need. No one needs, they say, an assault weapon. Well, whoever said that our gun rights were measured by some metric of need? It's not the Bill of Needs, right?
That's
But
right.
if they can convince society that gun ownership should be measured by a metric of need, who do you think would determine the parameters of need? It certainly wouldn't be anybody from the NRA or Gun Owners of America. It would be some leftist politician who create a new department to regulate the need of guns. There's a Minister of Gun Needs. Perfect. Okay, so here's another one that I want to touch on. Why do you need to carry a gun in public? There are two implications in this statement. We talked about need, but we need to talk about the word why. What happens when you're asked the question why? First of all, it assumes that the rest of the statement is true. Why is this? Why is that? So we're not asking if, right? We're asking why. So what happens to our brains when we're asked the question why? Our brains instantly go into problem-solving mode, and we try to come up with an answer. So when we're asked the question why, in this case, why do you need to carry a gun in public? We tend to justify our need. We tend to justify well, I need a gun for this and this and this and this. We don't have to justify our gun ownership, but they put us in a position with these narratives and with this terminology and with this propaganda that puts us in a position, because it's natural human nature. We want to answer the question. We want to solve the problem. That's how we operate. But it puts us in a position where we are justifying our gun ownership. We shouldn't do that. This one's very funny. You've heard it. Don't worry. We're not going to take away your guns. Don't worry. We're not going to take away your guns. There's some implications in this one too that are important, that we recognize when they use this stuff. They're influencing the narrative. They're influencing the conversation. And first of all, don't worry. What's the first thing you do when someone says don't worry? Right, exactly. the idea that first they want to put you in a sense of fear, Don't worry. Okay, well now I'm worried because I don't know what's next. We're not going to take away your guns. Oh, well, thank you so much. Oh, we really appreciate that. That's the idea. We're not going to take away your guns implies that they can. And that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that that Second Amendment is irrelevant and the gun grabbers can take away your guns. Well, we've got news for you. We're Americans, we're proud, and we do not compromise. So, I have a little, sometimes I have little responses to some of these things that they come up with. And my response to the don't worry, we're not going to take away your guns is because guns are so, oh, I'm sorry, let me get back to here. This is what I'm trying to get to. Because they always come up with these things, we like to have little, sometimes we come up with these little responses. So, don't worry, we're not going to take away your guns. There's a response for that. And it's, we know you're scared of guns, but don't worry, we're not going to make you carry one.
Right.
This is another one that I wanted to get to. It's along the same lines. It's another strategy they use in conversation. It's because guns are so dangerous, what restrictions are you willing to accept? There's a couple inherent implications here. And if you can see them, well, then you're pretty aware of what's going on. Because guns are so dangerous, what restrictions are you willing to accept? Well, the implications are, first of all, false implication that guns are dangerous. They're assuming, and you're assuming, by listening to this and having this conversation, that guns are dangerous, when we know they're not. We know that there's 2.5 million defensive gun uses per year in America. And I'm going to get into some of the statistics here in a minute. But this statement is to imply that, number one, guns are dangerous, and then to ask the question, what restrictions are you willing to accept? This implies that we're willing to accept any. We're not thinking, I'm not willing to accept restrictions. We're thinking, okay, well, let me think. What restrictions am I willing to accept? That's the idea. Our brains are problem-solving devices. When we're asked a question, what's 2 + 2? Your brain just instantly went into motion and answered the question without even realizing it. So the idea that they can ask the question triggers us to involuntarily, respond. So because guns are so dangerous implies that guns are dangerous, which is false, and gets you to start thinking about what you're willing to accept. In other words, where you're willing to compromise. My response to that is because guns are used 2.5 million times per year in America to save lives, when will you start supporting gun rights?
Amen.
This one is hysterical, but they still use it. How many children have to die before you'll agree to an assault weapons ban? This is obviously the guilt, right?
Lives that are aborted.
We all feel guilty at times. It's easy to trigger our guilt. There's lots of ways to do it, and they know how to do it, and they use it all the time. How many children have to die before you'll agree? In other words, it's your fault, right? Because you haven't gotten on board with gun restriction, gun laws, and you haven't got behind gun control to support it. So how many children have to die before you'll agree to an assault weapons ban? Well, I have a response to that. How many children have to die before you'll agree to ban gun-free zones?
That's right.
Do we know that the vast majority of gun-related, and not even gun-related, but all violence, happens in gun-free zones? Because people are rendered unarmed and helpless and can't defend themselves. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden is responsible for introducing the 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act. It was part of the Crime Control Act. Joe Biden sponsored it, introduced it, and since it was signed into law, school killings have doubled because nobody on staff who would likely be carrying a gun They can't do it anymore. And we've seen some of these school killings where the security is really limited, and where maybe there's one security guard or maybe there's none. It's not a good place to be for our children and our teachers. They're unarmed and helpless because of the 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act that Joe Biden introduced. The school killings have doubled since, and they continue at almost double the rate every decade. So wouldn't you think that by now they would figure it out and say, well, maybe this gun-free school zone thing isn't working out? They don't. This is a little chart. You can see the chart. You can see when the Gun-Free School Zones Act was signed into law, and you can see what the result after it was with school killings. You can see how everything just continued to go up, and if you look closely at that graph, you'll see that every decade the span doubled, almost doubled in the amount from the previous decade. We often hear this statement, you know, the majority of people agree, and they use this when they're pushing their latest gun control du jour. And the majority of people agree. Now this is to kind of, and they use it with all politics. It's not just gun-related stuff, but they'll use this all the time because the majority of people agree. What does that mean about you if you don't?
You live in the South.
You live in the South. That might be right. But the idea here is for you to believe that you're in the minority and you're not at the popular table.
Right.
Remember the popular table in junior high school? I mean, come on. I was never invited to sit at it, but I remember seeing it from afar. And that's the idea. You know, we still carry those ideas with us into our adulthood. And some people need that reassurance. They need to be part of the larger group. They need to be part of the popular club. They need to be part of that faction in life. So it works on a lot of people. Some of us it doesn't, like people in the South. That's right. But that's the idea behind the majority of people agree. So you'll hear that. Just keep your ears open for that one. So now let me get into some really interesting statistics here for you that you may not see much because this stuff is just not in the mainstream news. They don't want to show you the real statistics. 2017, this is interesting. We're talking about background checks now. Now everybody thinks, you know, they're pushing the universal background checks, that background checks are this great thing. When you know, if you don't know any better, you think, well, sure, background checks sound like a good idea, right? Well, let me show you some statistics to show you how failed the firearms background check system is. 2017, the Government Accountability Office reported 112,090 background check denials. Now, the anti-gun crowd is cheering in the streets. See, we stopped 112,000 mass murderers. Well, not so quick. The truth is, of the 112,090 background check denials, there were only 12,000 investigations. Why is that? It's because they very quickly realized that the vast majority of background check denials for firearms are what we call false positives. In other words, good people being denied their gun rights for no good reason. Could be any number of things: similar social security number, similar name, mistakes on the application, any number of reasons that good people are being denied. So you've got a big chunk of people who are being denied their gun rights and potentially put in danger because they can't defend themselves. And then the real kicker to this whole thing is there were only 12 prosecutions. So out of 112,090 background check denials, only 12 prosecutions. In other words, only 12 people who shouldn't have been purchasing a gun were attempting to do so. So then they say, well, see, we stopped 12 mass murderers. Well, if these people were killers, wouldn't they be in jail already? I mean, what are they doing roaming around on the streets? Well, they might live in New York where Kathy Hochul lets them out, but that's another story. Out of 112,000 90 background check denials, only 12 prosecutions, which means the vast majority of people are rendered unarmed and helpless every year because of a failed background check system. Now, you may have heard this in 2020. This was big news. They were really pushing this on the left-wing media. 300,000 background check denials for firearms. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're really doing a good job, right? They're really stopping a lot of these bad guys. Well, the truth is, the ratio of false positives didn't change. In 2020, and the Government Accountability Office didn't publish this. This was research that we really had to search for, because they learned after 2017, if they publish the actual number of prosecutions, it doesn't look good for them. So they didn't publish it in 2020. We had to find it, and out of 300,000 denials, there were 44 prosecutions. Wow. So the ratio didn't change. The ratio is actually 0.01%, but we're supposed to believe that 100% of 300,000 background check denials were justifiable. So the background check system is a massive failure. Now here's the next thing. This is interesting too, because we think about the background check denial. There's a pool of people in the background check denial pool, that I call it, and 85% of those people who are eligible to be denied gun ownership are illegal immigrants. So let me show you this chart. You can see the pool of people right here. The dark blue are illegal immigrants. The green, and it's probably might be hard for you to see, the very tippy top of that, felony convictions and mental health adjudications. What would happen to the background check denial numbers if Trump's wall was able to be built? If there were no illegals coming in? 85% of those background check denials wouldn't happen. Or 85% of them wouldn't, the numbers would go way down. So you wouldn't have anywhere near the 300,000. It would be a lot lower, but they don't want low numbers of background check denials, do they? They want the numbers of background check denials to be as high as possible so they can push the notion that they're doing a good job, when in fact they're only putting good people in danger because people are unable to protect themselves. So, why do they want more background check denials? Well, it's to gain support for universal background checks. I'm going to try to run through these a little quicker because I know we're running out of time, but background check denials equals support for more universal background checks. What are universal background checks? Why are they so important to these gun grabbers? Because a universal background check creates a gun registry. It's inherently part of the system to create a gun registry. And you may have heard of red flag laws. Red flag laws are these laws now that many states carry that will allow law enforcement to go into people's homes and confiscate guns without due process based purely on an accusation by another person.
Right.
And the idea here is, in order to enact red flag laws and confiscate guns, you need to know where they are.
Right.
That's where universal background checks come in. That's why they want them so bad, and that's why they're pushing ghost guns. And by the way, if you have any questions later, I'm happy to answer. I'll be out, I'll be doing a book signing out in the lobby there, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you want to talk about this stuff. So here are some quick statistics. How many people in the country? About 330 million. How many violent attacks? Well, this number can be, this number is different in a couple different places, but we're going to go with the low number of violent attacks. It can be up to 4.5 million violent attacks when you're including burglaries. But let's go with this number, 330 million people, 1.2 million violent attacks. Well, you can see, do the math. What's the odds? What are your odds of being the victim of a violent attack? It's 1 in 275. That's your odds. I don't like those odds. I mean, I think I don't think many people would like those odds. Where your odds change, they might get better for you if you live in the suburbs, nice neighborhood, maybe you live in a gated community or whatever. But if your odds get better, somebody else's odds have to get worse, because the number of people in the country didn't change and the number of violent attacks didn't change. They talk a lot about all these gun-related deaths, right? They talk about anywhere between 30 and 40,000 per year gun-related deaths. We have to take out suicides. When we hear that number, we have to take out suicides, because we cannot attribute gun-related suicides with guns related to suicides. We can't do that, because we already learned in Australia, when they completely banned guns, suicides didn't go down, they actually ticked up a little bit. In other words, in the absence of guns, people will find another way, another means.
Right.
And so we take that number out. So what we're left with is 14,400 gun-related deaths. This includes law enforcement, and it includes gang-related. Now, if we were able to take out the gang-related, we'd have almost nothing. But that's the number that they like. So why do I bring up that 14,400? I want you to see the contrast between the number of gun-related deaths to the number of defensive gun uses. Gary Kleck and Mark Gertz did a study, and they're Florida criminologists. At least Gary Kleck is a Florida criminologist. They did this study that determined 2.5 million defensive gun uses per year in America. That means 2.5 million potential lives are saved because people have guns, not necessarily using them. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of these defensive gun uses are simply the sight of a good guy with a gun deters the bad guy. Sometimes just brandishing the firearm, and sometimes, in small, rare cases, actually having to use it. But 2.5 million defensive gun uses per year in America to 14,400 gun-related deaths. Now, that means that guns are used 174 times to save lives for every one time they're used to take away. That sounds to me like a net positive for gun ownership.
That's right.
So I'm going to wrap it up with one last message, and that is our Second Amendment is not a privilege. It's our right. And there's no reason to be compromising with that very important right. So thanks so much. And like I said, I'll be outside. I'd love to talk to you if you have any questions. Thank you.